Hello, everyone. I hope everyone had a good coffee break and you got some good caffeine for this session. Thank you so much for being in this session. We are exploring in this session with the experts that we have here the intricate dynamics of security and justice in fragile and conflicted, affected situations. In recent times, we have witnessed a concerning rise in intrastate conflict and the emergence of non-state actors, which have significantly complicated the dynamics and the environment of what we thought conflict was, or what we've been seeing for many years. The ramifications of conflict extend far beyond the security concerns. They pose a direct threat to development efforts, to investments and outcomes, but mostly it affects the everyday life of the person that's going through this context, and that's who we need to think about. In light of these challenges, our discussion today aims to explore these questions, fundamental questions, and possible solutions. By fostering dialogue and exchanging insights, we attempt to find strategies that hold the potential to bolster security, justice, and stability in fragile environments. Today, how we're going to organize the session, it will be organized in a round of questions to our esteemed panelists, followed by opening the floor to Q&A. So here are just some housekeeping rules for us, all of us to know. Anyone wanting to follow online if in a different language can use the Wordly translation service at Cvent. Just click on the translation button on the right-hand side menu and choose the language appropriate for you. Note that this is AI generated and following in real time, so there might be just a slight delay. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment online, please use the chat function, which we have some of our people that are helping us here. And those here in the room, if you have a question, kindly note that I will switch between the room questions and online questions at the end. So I would like to introduce our first panelist. Vincenza Scherer, a security sector expert at the deputy head of the Policy and Research Division at DCAF. Thank you, Vincenza, for organizing this panel. In order to begin to frame our discussion today, could you share with us some thoughts on how the poor governance of the security sector contributes to fragility, conflict and violence, and how should we reconsider our analytical and operational support through a prevention lens?
Thank you very much, Catalina, and good afternoon, everyone. To answer your first question, I'll draw on some research conducted by DCAF under a UN-initiated project on the role of security sector governance and reform as a tool for prevention. The Pathways for Peace report highlights that inequality, exclusion, and injustice drive conflict, and in turn undermine development efforts. It also explains that these grievances are most likely to turn to violence in 4 arenas, namely the arenas of power and governance, land and resources, delivery of basic services, and access to justice and security. Now, we know that the security sector actors have powerful tools at their disposal to sustain peace and prevent conflict, or to do the opposite. A security sector which limits access to security and justice by marginalizing segments of the population or failing to protect their human rights will fuel grievances which can evolve into violent conflict. But through our research, we've also tried to reflect on the role that the security sector plays in driving risk and resilience factors across the other 3 arenas that I just mentioned. So, for instance, our research highlighted that security institutions can open access to power and governance, for instance, by securing voter participation or access to elections, or limit access by undermining power-sharing arrangements. They can also open access to land and resources, for instance, upholding decisions on land rights, or limit access by engaging in land grabs and natural resource exploitation. The security sector can also open access to basic services by enabling access to roads, water, schools. But they can also limit access, for instance, through poor fiscal management, which diverts resources from much needed services. So the security sector really can influence risk and resilience factors across the 4 arenas. Now, while these risk and resilience factors are entirely dependent on context, experience shows that they're typically underpinned by broad governance deficits, which revolve around accountability, effectiveness, and inclusiveness. And while accountability is always critical to keep predatory and abusive behavior in check, it must be balanced with effectiveness to ensure that the security sector is capable of responding to challenges. Otherwise, crippling capacity gaps will contribute to a loss of trust in the authorities, which can drive violence, as we've seen, for instance, in the Central African Republic. Our research also highlighted the importance of an inclusive security sector as a means of alleviating social exclusion by promoting social mobility. And poor representation of minority groups in the security sector can be an important factor in the escalation of conflict, as we've seen, for instance, in Osh crisis in 2010. Good governance of the security sector is therefore vital for preventing violence and promoting sustainable peace and development. But while there are many actors engaged, like DCAF, this is not where investments are systematically being made by the international community. The reality is that reforms aimed at strengthening the good governance of the security sector often fall through the cracks. This is because of a lack of resources for long-time endeavors, a reluctance to engage with what can be a politically risky sector, or a preference for more technical train and equip activities. But this implies that the risk and resilience factors related to the security sector and its governance are unlikely to be addressed. And yet, addressing these factors is vital to promote security, prevent violence, and sustain development. So this brings me to your second question, which was, what can we do differently? First, we need to be clear on what qualifies as prevention. There's been a tendency to label security sector reform activities as prevention when they've not actually been designed to address security sector risk factors to violence. This is a problem because it enables a discourse which says that prevention is not working when these activities were not actually designed to do this. Taking a prevention lens requires identifying and assessing risk and resilience factors and ensuring that these findings feed into deliberate design of political and programmatic engagement. Second, this requires improved assessment frameworks for risk and resilience factors. In line with calls for increased political economy analysis, we must recognize that prevention requires a grasp of power relations and incentive structures. This is something that we heard about several times in the sessions this morning. But assessment frameworks should also account for the role the security sector can play in fueling grievances across all 4 arenas of contestation I just mentioned. Current methodologies often consider the security sector only as a risk when it comes to access to security and justice. And this is really a missed opportunity to look at the prevention of violence in a more systemic manner, which breaks silos, which we heard so much about this morning again, particularly across peace and security and development communities. And it goes without saying that these assessments should really be underpinned by participatory approaches, which include those segments of society most affected by exclusion. And third, we must promote conversations on the issues that matter, which are often the most sensitive ones. We therefore need to focus on innovative ways to have these constructive conversations. There are some entry points for doing this. One is to engage in public expenditure reviews of the security sector. DCAF, for instance, has recently supported a public expenditure review in Somalia to help the government prepare for the ATMIS drawdown. The data and findings generated by this and the costing of their proposed strategy for the drawdown opened up an opportunity to discuss the realism of their strategy. Costing, very technically, the list of physical assets that the forces wished to acquire made the decision makers realize that it was just simply not feasible what had initially been planned. And this enabled DCAF to propose scenarios to jointly discuss with national counterparts what could be affordable with some support from international actors, and thus increase the likelihood of the implementation of the reforms and of the security strategy, which is so vital for stability in the country. Let me conclude with the reminder that for every grievance that erupts into violent conflict, undoubtedly more do not. And the security sector may be at the heart of grievances in one country, but not in another. And even when it plays a role in rising tensions, this may be in one context due to exclusion of ethnic minorities, for instance, or a lack of effective service delivery in another. But my key message is that if we're not factoring in the role of the security sector into our structural prevention efforts, then we're missing a significant opportunity to do things better. And in this regard, the analytical work conducted by the World Bank, the UN, DCAF, and other relevant organizations can be catalytic and can help inform discussions on development and prevention within a country. Including the security sector within these relevant diagnostic tools is an important opportunity to raise awareness among countries on priorities for public sector reform through a prevention lens. And ultimately, we should recall that the security sector reform is about improving service delivery to the population, and as such, should be addressed as an integral element of public sector reform efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincenza. Very interesting. I'm putting some notes, and at the end, we're gonna, kind of discuss an analysis of how the four speakers, what are they talking, and how do they relate to what they're saying. So we will now go to Halimatu Diba. She is the commissioner of the National Human Rights Commission in the Gambia, overseeing government relations and reporting mechanisms. She also has a prior experience as a lecturer in political science and a senior administrative officer at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Halimatu. Based on your experience at the Human Rights Commission of the Gambia, how can strengthening the good governance of the security sector contribute to social resilience? What can we do better through a social contract lens?
Thank you very much, Catalina. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. So first, before going to the question, I'll just give a little bit of background information just to put things in context when it comes to social resilience and the social contract when it comes to security sector governance and the Gambia as a fragile state. So that gives us context into why we go about the ways we deal with these things at the National Human Rights Commission. So the Gambia was under a dictatorial rule for 22 years, where we saw a lot of atrocities being carried out by the security sector. And then this changed in 2016 when we had an election that ousted the dictatorial regime. And after that, as part of efforts to consolidate democracy in the Gambia, we had lots of reform mechanisms, lots of commissions. Amongst them was TRRC, that is the Truth Commission, that was set up to establish the truth about some of the violations that were carried out by the security sector apparatus, different. And then we had the National Human Rights Commission that was also set up as part of this democratic consolidation to bring human rights to the forefront. And in that, the National Human Rights Commission falls as a governance body or an oversight body over the security sector. So most of our work deals with human rights, but also governing the security sector. But the TRRC, that is the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparation Commission that we had, is very central to the work we do because we had revelations. It ran for 3 years, and then through that, it was realized that the regime had used the security sector, the armed forces especially, to carry out all of these atrocities. We'd had military juntas that were responsible for enforced disappearances, arbitrary arrests, sexual and gender-based violence. It was a lot. 17 themes were heard through these 3 years. So when the National Human Rights Commission, we are a permanent commission that is responsible to ensure that this security sector is reformed, is aligned with democracy through their governance. So that is basically it when it comes to the security sector in the Gambia. So in this work, one of the main things we have as a responsibility is when the report of the TRRC came out, we were mandated as a Human Rights Commission to spearhead the security sector reform in the country. Yes, we have a national security policy, we have a strategy, but it is very slow right now. The reform that we anticipated in the country is quite slow right now. So the NHRC, while waiting for other partners to ensure that the security sector reform is geared up, we are not held back. What we are doing is we've introduced different initiatives and also to work on the TRRC report, that is the atrocities we heard from the hearings, but also initiate other ways to ensure that the security sector is reformed. So in that, we're guided by the societal resilience, which is in relation to your question. Some of the societal resilience that we see, first of all, which is obvious, is that we've seen a lot of national discourse around security sector reform in the country. So this discourse has garnered way for people to, it's like never again mantra in the country. So with that, the National Human Rights Commission, what we're doing is we're introducing human rights and humanitarian law as part of the training programs of all security sector apparatus, starting with the army. Because the thing we saw with the TRRC is that the army sort of took over the security in the Gambia. The police were in the background, the drug law enforcement agents were. So everything that happened in the country, the enforced disappearances, the atrocities during protests and all, it was the army. The army was supposed to protect the state, but we saw that they were the ones that really violated human security in the country. So now the main thing that we are saying is while people are dealing with the aftershocks of the TRRC, they're also calling for reform. But we know that these things are gradual, right? It's a country that has been hurt in different ways. People expect, but we, in recognition of the fact that this is gradual, take different initiatives like when we go by the TRRC report, right, which is taking time, but we also have initiatives like what we call the mobile legal clinics, right? So with that, while other institutionalized procedures are taking time, the National Human Rights Commission goes inland, right, annually through a comprehensive procedure where we go with the Office of the Ombudsman, the Ministry of Justice, members of the police, to go and hear the threats and the trends when it comes to the security sector so that our security sector reform and governance can be informed by the actual security issues that are going on. And with that, we see that even though some people during these mobile legal aids do not actually lodge complaints to us, but then we see a trend, especially when it comes to SGBV, which is sort of rooted in the patriarchal system that we have in the Gambia. And the sad thing we've seen is that our security sector, especially the police, are not trained enough to deal with these SGBV cases, right? So the National Human Rights Commission, we train the police, right, with other bodies, obviously, on how to handle these things. But there is another problem, that is another societal issue, that's there is people are not willing to go report these cases to the police because of the history of them not handling these cases very well. So we're taking different approaches. of not seeing it as just we need to change the structure of the police, but how to ensure that this is ensuring human security, because we know that what are the linkages to SGBV? It's the violence aspect is there, but it affects the other aspects of the victims' lives. And another thing is that when we go for some of these mobile legal aid clinics, most people would tell us they don't have issues with the security sector, because to them, the problems with the security sector is enforced disappearances or arbitrary arrests. But we are trying to let them know that a dysfunctional security sector is not limited to just that. So we bring in with the human rights-based approach to say that even economic, social, and cultural rights that are not being handled very well, like issues of access to land, education, and all, are, if they are not handled well, are problematic to the security sector. So you will see that that social contract is not there, right? So while we are with the army trying to ensure a very cordial civil-military relations, to ensure that people are not disappearing, to ensure that there is no impunity, accountability, and all. These are things that we pick up with this thing. Another thing is that our complaint handling mechanism. So we have a complaint handling mechanism where people, at this point, can I just put it that human rights is very new to Gambians, understanding it or claiming rights and all of that. So we have a lot of education, a lot of unlearning and relearning to do. So through this complaint handling, we know that just officializing it, people might not utilize it as much. So we know that you can have walk-ins, you can call, you can complain on behalf of, and in this complaint handling mechanisms, most of the complaints we see are against the security sector apparatus, that is the police, the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, the Immigration Department, you name it. And through that, we're seeing again that issues we did not hear during the TRRC are problems within the security sector. They were not necessarily addressed through the TRRC, even though we still have persistent issues, but we are seeing new things. Things like the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, how they also arbitrarily arrest. And most of their victims are young people, which gives us, again, that lens, social contract lens, that the youth unemployment in the Gambia is a big problem, right? So handling the security sector reform, or in our security sector governance, we're seeing a developmental issue there, right? It is a population that grew up under this regime. It is a population that had a very strained relation with the security sector. So we are linking with other partners, the developmental issues and security sector reform when it comes to youth. And another example that I want to, something that brought other developmental aspects to the limelight for us is, again, under the auspices of this complaint handling mechanism, is something that was never discussed in terms of fragility or in terms of conflict in Gambia was the caste and descent-based discrimination that we have in parts of the Gambia. That came to us through a complaint because someone had died because he apparently belonged to a lower caste. And then when that complaint came to us, right, when we were handling it, we saw that the police did not even take up those cases, because they saw it as exclusively traditional, so they did not want to interfere into the traditional hierarchy of those. So in that, we did a research. And through that research, we saw that, again, there was a strained social contract when it comes to these people, because it was not just the issue that led to death, but then the women that belonged to the so-called slave clan did not have access to land. The children were not sometimes, if they had issues in school with others that were supposed to be the nobles, then they did not go to school again. Most of them did not go to school. So again, access to education, to health, all of those things, and the security sector was not even taking up cases. Once they say this is a noble versus a so-called slave, excuse my language, that's the term they use, They don't even take up, and we had all of these issues embedded in those cases. So again, as a Human Rights Commission, when we deal with security sector, when we are governing them, right, we take things beyond what the public is just discussing as enforced disappearances, civil and political rights. So this is how we're going about ensuring societal resilience and the social contract in the Gambia as a Human Rights Commission. Thank you.
I'm already starting to see something similar between these two. Between these two speakers. We'll see about the other two speakers and, kind of similarities and differences also. Thank you, Halimatu. We also have today Emmanuel Steinhilper, a senior governance specialist at the World Bank with extensive experience in public sector governance in Western and Central Africa, South Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you, Emmanuel, for joining us. In your view, as someone working on governance issues within the World Bank, how does the security sector intersect with broader objectives of public sector governance reform, including the engagement on public finance management? What has the World Bank learned from its engagement in the field?
Thank you so much, Ambassador Crespo. And I would like to start out also by acknowledging that while I'm on the podium today, there are actually many colleagues in the World Bank working on this agenda and also advised on this session. I'm very grateful for that. So a key message I would like to emphasize to start with is that the World Bank looks at security and the security sector really from a development angle, and that's really important. Because as per our mandate and comparative advantage, we focus more on the security development nexus and the impact that fragility, conflict, and violence have on broader development rather than the security sector per se. And it's also important to note that the bank, in fact, cannot advise on efficiency, equity, effectiveness of military spending. And this development-centric approach is also codified in our new updated FCV policy. Now, looking at the security sector and security sector spending, various analyses actually showed that conflict is extremely costly. And not only, of course, in terms of the human suffering and the impact, the direct impact on people, but also in terms of its negative impact on the economy and development as a whole. And that's really where we come in. Conflict can set you back in your growth trajectory, your fight against poverty dramatically. Even within a very short period, all the achievements can be gone. And it's therefore so important to invest more in conflict prevention. And that's actually the strategic approach promoted by the bank's FCV strategy. Now, we've also learned that the security is a very unique and quite complex sector, starting, of course, a bit with the information that's often sensitive, if not confidential. So it's sometimes extremely challenging to get access to data. Not only for us or international partners, by the way, but often also for institutions in the countries, including ministries of finance, for instance, who are sometimes not completely aware of what's going on in that sector. So even more so than in other sectors, true government ownership and a reform champion are really critical to move on this agenda and do some reforms. Now, regarding some of the specific lessons we learned more in the area of public finance, I like to illustrate them with the example of some security public expenditure reviews that we did a few years ago in the Sahel region. And what we observed there, in fact, is that the growing threats in the region really led to a very significant increase in the G5 Sahel security expenditures. In fact, we noted a doubling over the period that we looked at, so really a very sizable change. And it also increased as a share of GDP, as a share of the budget, and was mostly driven by spending on equipment. There was a six-fold increase actually in that category, and that contributed to that overall increase. We also found that security personnel expenditure, even though it didn't increase as much, still remains a very sizable chunk. It was actually more than half of the overall expenditure. So even though there's all vehicles and ammunition and the equipment side, the actual people in the security sector, in terms of the spending, really remains very important. And now, again, from the World Bank perspective, why are we even looking at this? I mean, we're coming at this from the development impact perspective, and really the risk or the concern that security spending may crowd out development expenditures. That's really what we're looking at. The IMF is also analyzing this dimension, and of course, every dollar that's spent on security is a dollar that's not available for other service delivery, education, health, and so forth. At the same time, I mean, in the context of the Sahel, what we notice is that, I mean, given the really persisting security threat, it's very unlikely, at least in the short term, that security spending could be dramatically reduced, or that we can all of a sudden go back to the pre-crisis levels. And so in this context, what countries are really looking for is some ways to better manage their spending. Not only the security spending, by the way, but more their public sector spending overall, including the security sector expenditure. And in terms of the findings that we had on these reviews, for the security sector now, it's really identified a few risk areas and also possible areas for reform that impact on the social expenditure. First of all, in terms of the predictability of the spending. The planning and budgeting in the security spending sector was often quite weak, with a lot of ad hoc and extra and special emergency budgetary allocations, which then also impacted on the other spending, because there's always an emergency mode and need to reallocate funding to this key priority, of course, which is security. Also in terms of wages, as I mentioned, they remain a really sizable chunk of security spending. Moving, for instance, towards more electronic payment of salaries, which is not yet systematically the case. In procurement, again, a big spending category, strengthening the special bodies that are in charge of these procurement in the sector. And last but not least, and I think it was mentioned by others, transparency and controls, really the need to increase both, for instance, the internal control, more accountability of the spending. Not everything can, of course, be public, but there are some institutions specialized that can have a look, and there's also an opportunity to do, for instance, ex post controls of military on security sector spending. So I'll wrap it up here. These are just some examples of in the area of public financial management that you asked for specifically, that can impact on the broader development expenditures. And of course, some other partners, including some of the panel, may be better placed than the World Bank to advise on specific reforms in those areas. But on our side, we really will continue to focus on the development nexus and development rationale and impact that the security sector has on development, which are the guiding principles of our institution. So I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And lastly, we have Christophe Pradier, joining us. Christophe is a SSR officer at the United Nations. He spearheads the creation of strategic guidance and collaborative initiatives within the UN, within the UN Interagency SSR Task Force. So Christophe, thank you for sharing your experience with us today. We're increasingly aware of the importance of strengthening partnerships to promote better synergies. What can we learn from mission-driven partnerships between peace and security and development actors on security sector governance and reform, including, for instance, public sector expenditure reviews?
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you to the World Bank FCV Group for hosting us. Partnerships, yeah. I mean, we heard from the Commissioner, security sector reform works when it's fully owned and led by the national authorities of the country. The UN, we are here to support the national authorities. We don't have, unfortunately, too many success stories of SSR. I have to be very honest about it. But there are success stories, mainly in Sub-Saharan Africa. I can think of Côte d'Ivoire, right? Which until 5 years ago was hosting a peace operation. And it was listed as a fragility conflict-affected situation by the World Bank. Today, it graduated from the FCS list. It was the mission, the UN peacekeeping operation left, and the country was actually on the Security Council 3 years ago. And what was the reason for success was very strong leadership from the head of state, President Ouattara, but also his ability to bring together all the sectors to work together around one single framework, the national SSR strategy of Côte d'Ivoire, which was actually a national peace-building strategy or a national development plan. You know, labels are actually not that relevant in that case. But this strategy provided a comprehensive framework, a blueprint for reforms. The second success factor, in my view, was the ability of the Côte d'Ivoire government to leverage partnership, to mobilize partnership, and also for financing. So, of course, we're not expecting the international financial institutions to finance security sector reform, to buy weapons or finance military infrastructure. And I fully agree with you, Emmanuel. A dollar spent on security is a dollar which is not spent on social and economic development priorities. And that means that the governments in many countries which are facing rising security challenges have no choice. They have to improve the quality of their expenditure. Not only the security expenditure or public sector expenditures, but also the security expenditures. The IMF recently found that security expenditure in the former G5 Sahel countries now represent 4% of GDP. I can give you the example of my country, France. Security expenditures represent maybe 2.5%, if we're very generous. So it shows the fiscal burden. Let me give you another success story, in my view, on partnerships and the ability of the national authorities to leverage this partnership to ensure adequate, predictable, and sustainable financing for SSR. And this is Somalia. And I'm sure a lot of you were at the first session this morning, and you heard the Deputy Prime Minister, who I thought made a very strong point about two things. National authorities have to be in the driving seat, and all the partners have to come around the national plans, national framework. What's so interesting about Somalia, its security sector governance has been a national priority. It's been articulated in the National Development Plan since basically the federal government was established. Back in December, the president of Somalia, his national security advisor, but also his minister of finance, were together at the UN to present the Somalia Security Development Plan. And our friend Vincenza mentioned DCAF's support to the federal government of Somalia. The UN was also involved in partnership with DCAF. And it was actually, it's a very interesting story, I think. You know, the UN has a peace and security pillar and a development pillar. Under Secretary General Guterres, we've witnessed massive progress in integration between peace and security actors and the development actors, the development agencies, funds and programs of the UN. And Somalia is actually a success story. Our peace special political mission, the UN mission in Somalia, UNSOM, and UNDP pool resources to contract DCAF to support the federal government of Somalia with assessing the cost of ATMIS transition, drawdown and exit on the Somalia security sector, on Somalia. And they're also helping, hopefully in the second phase, with proper public expenditure review, with assessing the funding requirements for the national security architecture that the national authorities of Somalia have designed. What was so interesting about this Somalia Security Conference hosted by the UN in December is the Minister of Finance was there. And he actually chaired the third session of the conference, which was about resourcing Somalia Development Plan. And it shows that the Minister of Finance was actually in the driving seat in assessing the funding requirement, but also the funding gaps, the financing gap. And the President made, in his concluding remark, very strong plea to the partners to use the Somalia system, national system, and to align their support and the funding with the priorities outlined in the development plan. This is hopefully where our partners, the partners Somalia, will heed to listen to the President's plea. And I have to finish with the Gambia, which is very has a special place in my heart, because the UN has been supporting the national authorities, I think since President Barrow was elected. And again, it's another very powerful example. To me, it's the success story of SSR, even if, of course, there's been some slow implementation for a couple of years. But really, the President Barrow's vision on SSR, on transforming, it's not a reform, it's transformation of the security sector. It's building inclusive, effective, accountable security. What's striking about Somalia, it's an alignment of all the national authorities, the Human Rights Commission, the Ministry of Finance, the security ministries. All the plans are aligned and coherent. The National Security Sector Reform Strategy, it's aligned with the National Development Plan. The National SSR Strategy is anchored in the truth in the TRC report. And the TRC report puts forth a very robust prevention agenda. The financing also, and I should have started with that, the main signal of national ownership is when the national authorities commit to funding SSR through tax revenue, so revenue mobilization. And the Gambian authorities have very recently committed to funding the security sector reform through custom levies and through improving the revenue mobilization. The Gambia is a great example of partnership, but mission-driven partnership. Very pragmatic approach to partnership. The bank conducted a public expenditure review. The UN was informally associated to the PER. The UN helped the government with a number of what we call technical assessment missions at critical stages of the SSR process. I was not in those missions, my team was there, but we collaborated with the World Bank and the IMF. And maybe that's my final message about partnerships. They have to be mission-driven. they have to be grounded on shared assessment of the risk posed by weak security sector governance, by the drivers of fragility and conflict, but most importantly, and we count on Vincenza DCAP to figure it out, on resilience, how to strengthen the institutional resilience of the security sector, through more effective support, more coordinated support from the UN, and also from multilateral development banks. And I'm going to do some self-promotion. We have a session on Friday, on the Partnership Day, on the partnership between the UN and multilateral development banks on security and justice. And we will go further into discuss further these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Christophe. So I think we're going to collect 2 or 3 questions from the floor and no questions online. So if there's anyone that would have a question, maybe if you can stand up over there, there's a microphone, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I start?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you so much, and thanks for your insight. Very, very interesting. Security is a basic service and should be treated like access to education, to health. Why this sector is not part of the PFM landscape, is not part of the system? Why this sector should be treated differently? How can we do to bring this sector back to the regular system, to be able to make them delivering basic services, protecting citizens, being accountable for that, being part of the social contract, and having some accountability mechanism to monitor if they are doing well with this social contract. And maybe it will help at the end to reduce or to mitigate risk of coup, because the fact that this sector is treated differently is an issue, and how to address it. Thanks.
Maybe there's another question, and we'll take the 2 questions, and then we'll let the panelists answer.
Right. Thank you very much for your fruitful discussion. My name is Kin. I'm the Minister of Commerce from the National Unity Government of Myanmar. We formed the government to oppose the military coup in Burma called Myanmar. And also I'm glad to see women panelists on the stage, because 10 years ago I was a security sector reform advisor to Myanmar peace process, but at the peace conference I was asked to go to the social session, not to discuss about security sector reform. So I was so glad to see women panelists on the stage. And actually, I found out that we have failed to prevent the conflict re-emergence in Myanmar due to non-integration of security sector reform in the peace process. Actually, there were 5 issues in peace process: political, economic, social, and natural resources, and security sector reform. But we were asked not to touch about security sector issue because it was so sensitive, and then not to integrate with other principles for the federal principles when we developed and negotiate at the peace conference in Myanmar. So now we are in a position to redesign the country reform agenda for the next few years for the post-conflict peace-building state. And then I'm about to propose a multi-dimensional security sector reform approach. And then I would like to get comments from the security sector experts because it is very important to do a kind of holistic approach for peace, development, and security sector reform together in designing the country reform during the post-conflict state building process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have one last question.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering if there is any initiative going on regarding the security sector reform or transformation and the industry of arms and the countries producing and exporting arms. I think that's a conversation that is not going on. And I come from a country that has lived 60 years in armed confrontation, and the arms are not produced in my country. They come from outside. So I would like to know if there is something regarding that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll let the panelists answer to either all of them or one of the questions.
Thank you so much for the questions. Maybe I'll answer the first question because it's something I feel very passionate about, and I really feel what you're saying because I keep asking myself that same question too. And so why is it not part of the PFM landscape? Why do we treat it differently? And this was actually in the Pathways for Peace report, which said that security sector reforms are often addressed separately for institutional reforms. So it's something which is known, and I think it's because as we know, it's usually development actors lead more on the institutional. On the security side, peace and security is more how we approach SSR. So there's really these silos that we were discussing this morning. And how can we get these actors to work, together and to look at it as one? I think if we don't, rightly, as you said, it's a missed opportunity. First of all, in terms of being more cost effective, because we're rolling out the reforms separately when really we could be doing some of them, at least that the more technical elements I think could be rolled out at the same time. But also we're lowering the bar, right? Because we're accepting that the security sector is different, and therefore it doesn't have to be held accountable to the same principles. And I think that's part of the problem of this disconnect. And what can we do differently? I think really underline that support to security sector reform, there's a lot of political, but there are some technical elements. And, it's possible to engage at that technical level, as we heard, for instance, with public expenditure reviews, looking at issues of procurement, etc., building leadership capacities. There are some elements which are less sensitive and where maybe, more can be done. But I think that's part of our conversation here today is really trying to raise this awareness that we need the development and peace and security pillars or communities to really be working closely to close some of these gaps which otherwise really undermine our broader efforts to strengthen prevention and development.
Thank you, Vincenza. Emmanuel, I thought you wanted to answer to one of the questions?
Sure.
Thank you.
With pleasure, and thank you for the excellent questions. So maybe reacting to that concept of security as a public service, I fully agree. I mean, of course, there is no development without security. That's a very fundamental observation. Now, the question comes a bit, of course, internally, and for different institutions, it's treated differently. I mean, just by, if we look at the World Bank mandate and the FCV policy, so clearly there is a distinction between the security sector and things we can do, for instance, education and health. But then, as I outlined in my remarks earlier, there are also some things that are really similar. I mean, when it comes to the management, if we come to planning, wage bill management, procurement, transparency, all of those things can be applied across sectors, including the security sector. So for me, the question is then a bit more, what's the comparative advantage also, and I would say a bit the distribution of tasks and labor between different institutions. Clearly, the bank probably is more familiar with the civilian side, the management side, and then the impact on the broader development expenditures and public finance reforms. But maybe there are other actors that are specialized and can go more deeply into the security specific sector-specific dimensions. Again, keeping in mind a bit your overall picture of the final objective, which is, of course, to provide security and provide the conditions for development. Thank you.
Christophe, Halimatu, do you have anything else that you would like to add? Okay. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for those questions. On why is the security sector not anchored in or integrated in the PFM frameworks and coordination mechanism? I've actually seen good enough, good practice. Sorry, I should not use the word good practice, but it was in Liberia under the leadership of President Johnson Sirleaf. The time of planning the drawdown and exit of a UN peacekeeping mission. The president asked for the UN and the bank to work together on public expenditure review at two critical stages of the transition process, which unfolded over 5 years. But what was interesting, as the session, following up on my answers on partnership, the main partners of Liberia, bilateral partners, and we have not talked about them. And it's obviously the US government, but also the Europeans, Sweden and the European Union. They advocated with the counterparts, ministry, in their different donor coordination mechanisms for, public for the development of the government transition plan and the financing of the financing of security, as obviously the cost of security was going to go up following the departure of the peacekeepers. So all the partners were aligned with asking the government to have a comprehensive approach. And the government followed the advice and developed a peace-building statement of mutual commitments between the government of Liberia and the international partners. So really a framework for mutual accountability. And the UN provided the institutional platform for that through a Peace-Building Commission, which is a group where it's a body of 40 member states in New York that serves as a platform for, governments who want to engage with the Peace-Building Commission to present a comprehensive, integrated approach to security, justice, development. And what was interesting about the peace-building plan of the government, there was actually a chapter on PFM, there was a chapter on SSR, and they were linking it. My conclusion is we're doing a terrible job learning from good practice. It's obviously in this day and age easy to cry about the state of the world, but there are good practice, but it requires a lot of more effort from our side and more resources to learn and really give the Liberian government, let them tell us how they did it. My last, on arms control and SSR, it's the most sensitive issue in the Security Council today. All our country of peace operations subject to an arms embargo by the Council under sanction regime are asking the Council to lift our arms embargo. And they don't want to wait to reach or implement the security sector reforms that the Council is asking them to implement as a condition for lifting. And today the Council is very divided. Russia and China want the Council to lift arms embargo without any view. Well, I have to say the Western states, what we call the P3, are still insisting on the host states to reach those good governance standards in security sector as a condition to lift the arms embargo. The truth is, in many of our African countries which are hosting peace operations, the armed groups fighting the government and of course terrorizing the population, they have no problem getting weapons. I think we can talk offline on this.
Thank you. So there have been 3 overarching themes within everything that they've been talking about, which they have been talking about different experiences, different countries. So in my view, I'll tell you what those are. They all talked about the need to strengthen institutions, not only the security sector, but institutions, public institutions overall. That's the one thing, including accountability and including controls. The second one is a prevention lens is the way to go. Not only because it saves lives, but it's cheaper, and it's better for the economy, and it's better for the people, for the everyday life of people. So that is the second overarching theme. And the third one is that the changes and decisions have to come within a country. They have to be made and come within the country itself, with the international support or the international arena providing support. So I was one of the authors with other colleagues of mine, that when we were here at the World Bank, I was one of the authors in the Pathways for Peace, a long time ago. And it is talking about the importance of prevention. And when you look at when institutions are starting to debilitate, that's already a red flag. So again, these practitioners, these specialists, these 4 specialists here have shown you with examples what can be better done in different countries. And there's a last thing also is that this institution strengthening, this prevention lengths and the changes have to include what Halimatu was mentioning, capacity building, and an education component. An education, not only formal education in K through 12 or a university, I'm talking training for every public sector official. That has to be, which includes a human right lens. So although it is slow, as she mentioned, it is not only the way to go, but because it is institutionalized, it is easier to send a mandate from the government to say all military personnel have to be trained in this and this and this. It is a lot easier to do that than non-state actors. So those are the overarching themes. And I wanted to send you with a question that, of course, I would have liked the specialist or the experts to give you some of their inputs. However, you can talk to them outside when you see them. It is, how can we demystify the need for development actors to engage with the security sector through a prevention lens? So if you see them out there, please ask them, because they will be able to help. If not, think about that in your own work. So I wanted to thank DCAF for organizing this panel, but mostly I wanted to thank Vincenza, Halimatu, Emmanuel, and Christophe. Thank you for the work that you do every day, but thank you also here for sharing it with the people that are here. And thanks for the World Bank for putting this Fragility Forum together. Thank you so much.